They told him to pick one of the two Apache slaves as a reward. He looked at them and chose both. The desert stretched endlessly under the scorching sun. Sand shimmered like gold in the heat, and the wind carried a sharp, dry bite that made it hard to breathe. In this unforgiving land, survival was never guaranteed. Every day was a test of endurance, skill, and sometimes luck. Jacob Carter, a man of rugged build and weathered features, rode his horse steadily along a narrow trail, keeping his eyes alert to every movement in the rocks and distant cliffs. He had lived in the Southwest for years, and the desert had made him strong, but it had also taught him caution. Nothing here was easy, and nothing came without risk. Jacob had joined the small band of settlers and mercenaries who worked with the local authorities to keep the trade routes safe. The region was full of conflict. Native Apache bands were fiercely protective of their lands, and settlers often crossed into territories they did not fully understand. Clashes were common, and each encounter could turn deadly in a matter of minutes. Jacob was known for his courage, but he was also careful. He had seen too many men act recklessly and pay the ultimate price. That morning, the group had tracked a small Apache band suspected of raiding nearby settlements. Jacob moved silently with the others, listening to the distant sounds of the desert. A bird squawked sharply and his horse shied slightly. He calmed it with a gentle pat, his eyes scanning the horizon. It was the kind of day that could change a man's life in seconds. As they crested a rocky ridge, Jacob saw the Apache camp below. There were just a few tents and a small fire. The band looked unprepared for a fight, and Jacob felt a mix of relief and unease. He did not take joy in violence, but he understood the reality of survival in this land. His commander, a stern man named Colonel Wallace, gestured to the group. They were to approach quietly, take the captives, and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Jacob led the group down the slope, moving with deliberate care. He noticed the wary eyes of the Apache, the way they clutched their weapons and held their children close. For a moment, he paused. These were human beings, not just names on a report. They had families, fears, and stories that no one here seemed to care about. His heart tightened, but he pushed the thought aside. Duty called, and hesitation could cost lives. The skirmish was brief but tense. The Apache fought with determination, but they were outnumbered and unprepared. Jacob moved with precision, disarming rather than harming wherever possible. By the end, the camp was under control. The Apache had surrendered, and there were no serious injuries. Jacob exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the day's events settle on his shoulders. Colonel Wallace approached him after the captives were secured. "Carter," he said, his voice firm but approving, "you did well today, brave and efficient. You've earned your reward." Jacob nodded, unsure of what to expect. Rewards in this land were rarely material. Often they came in the form of land, money, or influence. But today, the colonel gestured toward the captives. "You may choose one of these two as your reward." Jacob froze. His eyes fell on the two captives, a young man and a young woman, both appearing no older than their late teens. They were siblings, though he could not have known that immediately. Their faces were dusty and tired, but there was a spark of defiance in their eyes, a courage that seemed unbroken despite their situation. The idea of choosing one human being over another as a reward struck Jacob with sudden, heavy clarity. He felt his stomach tighten, and for the first time that day, he hesitated. Slavery was a reality in these lands, and captives were often treated as property, but Jacob had always struggled with the morality of it. He had seen cruelty up close, and he had never allowed himself to participate willingly. Now, he was being asked to make a choice that went against everything in his heart. He studied the young man first. His eyes were wary but intelligent, calculating the situation with sharp awareness. There was fear there, yes, but also resilience. The boy had survived much to reach this point, and Jacob could sense the strength in him. Then his gaze shifted to the young woman. She seemed smaller, more delicate, but her eyes were steady, full of determination and quiet pride. She had not cried. She had not begged. She had met his eyes without flinching, as if daring anyone to see her as anything less than human. Jacob's mind raced. Choosing one would mean condemning the other to a life of separation, to being treated as a prize or a servant. He felt a deep anger toward the system that allowed such decisions to be considered normal. He clenched his fists, aware of the colonel's impatient gaze, but he could not move. How could he choose between two lives that both deserved freedom? The desert wind blew across the camp, lifting dust into the air. Jacob took a step closer to the captives, noticing their cautious glances. They did not speak his language, but he could feel their fear and mistrust. He wished he could explain that he did not see them as objects, that he would not treat them as anyone's property. But words would not come easily. Instead, he nodded slightly, a silent promise that he would not abandon them. Colonel Wallace cleared his throat, a sharp reminder that time was passing. "Make your choice, Carter, one only." Jacob's eyes met the two young people again, and something inside him hardened. He would not play this cruel game. He would not divide them. He would not allow fear or greed to dictate morality. Slowly, deliberately, he looked at the colonel and spoke with firm conviction. "I choose both." The words hung in the air. For a moment no one moved. Colonel Wallace's face turned red with anger. "Both? You can't. This is impossible. The rules are clear." Jacob stood his ground, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his knife, a gesture of quiet strength rather than threat. "I am not following rules that punish the innocent. They are not rewards. They are human beings, and I will treat them as such. Both or none." The tension was thick. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react. They had never seen anyone defy the colonel in this way, yet Jacob's voice did not waver. His decision was not just about morality. It was about justice, about doing what he knew in his heart was right. The young man and woman stared at him in disbelief. Their fear was still present, but a flicker of hope crossed their faces. They could not speak his language, but his actions conveyed a promise that was louder than any words could be. He would not abandon them. He would protect them. Colonel Wallace barked an order, clearly enraged. "You will leave this camp with only one. Take the boy or the girl." "That is the command." Jacob shook his head. "No, I will leave with both, or I leave nothing at all. I will not separate them." The standoff lasted only a few moments, but it felt like an eternity. Then, with a grunt of frustration, the colonel stepped back. He was not used to being challenged, but he knew Jacob's reputation. The man would not back down easily. Finally, Wallace spat to the side and muttered, "Take them, but don't expect me to approve." Jacob exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of relief and tension. He approached the siblings, bowing slightly as a gesture of respect. "Come with me," he said gently, in the few words of their language he had learned during encounters. He gestured for them to follow. Their eyes widened, a mixture of caution and disbelief, but they moved toward him. As they walked through the desert together, Jacob kept glancing at the siblings, studying their faces, their expressions, the way they moved. He could see the pain and fear still present, but also the strength and resilience that had carried them through unimaginable hardships. He silently promised that he would do everything in his power to keep them safe, to protect them, and to treat them with dignity. The journey back to his camp was long and arduous. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. Jacob led the siblings carefully, helping them navigate rocky paths and offering water when it was available. Though the desert was harsh, there was a quiet beauty in the landscape, a reminder that even in the most difficult places, life found a way to endure. By the time they reached the safety of the camp, the desert was bathed in the soft light of evening. Jacob found a quiet spot away from the other men and gave the siblings some food and water. They ate cautiously, their eyes darting around, unsure of what to expect. Jacob did not rush them. He waited patiently, understanding that trust was earned slowly, not demanded. That night, as the stars began to twinkle above the vast desert, Jacob sat quietly, watching the siblings settle near the small fire. He thought about the events of the day, about the choice he had made, and about the dangers that still lay ahead. He knew that protecting them would not be easy. There would be challenges, disapproval, and threats from both the land and the people in it. But he also knew that he could not turn back. For the first time in a long while, Jacob felt a deep sense of purpose. He was no longer just a man surviving in the desert. He was a protector, a guardian of lives that mattered. And in that quiet desert night, under the vast canopy of stars, he vowed to himself that he would honor that responsibility, no matter the cost. The two siblings huddled together, and though they did not fully understand Jacob's words, they could sense the sincerity in his actions. Fear was still there, but it was mixed with a fragile hope. And for Jacob, that fragile hope was enough to keep him moving forward into an uncertain, dangerous, but meaningful future. The desert had a quiet stillness as the first light of morning touched the horizon. Jacob Carter stirred awake before the others, the cold air of dawn brushing against his skin. He looked over at the two siblings huddled together near the fire. Their faces, tired and tense, reflected a mixture of fear and cautious hope. He could see that they were beginning to trust him, though only slightly, and that small progress filled him with determination. Jacob had decided that the first priority was to establish trust. He knew the desert was unforgiving, and that fear could make survival even harder. If the siblings did not believe in his intentions, the journey ahead could be disastrous. So, he began to prepare for the day carefully, ensuring that they would have enough water and food for the trek ahead. He spoke softly to them, pointing to the water skins and offering a few words of comfort. Though they did not understand his language fully, the tone of his voice mattered more than words. As the sun rose higher, the trio set out along the narrow desert trail. Jacob walked between the two siblings, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The desert seemed alive with small signs, a lizard darting over the sand, birds taking flight, the distant glimmer of rocks that might hide danger. Jacob's senses were sharp. Every rustle, every shadow was a potential threat. He had survived in this land long enough to know that complacency could be deadly. The young man, whose name Jacob learned was Tay, was cautious but alert. He followed Jacob's instructions carefully, stepping over rocks and avoiding loose sand that could make movement difficult. The young woman, Maya, moved with quiet grace, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Jacob noticed the bond between them. They moved almost in unison, protecting each other instinctively, even as they adjusted to the presence of someone new in their lives. As the day wore on, the desert grew hotter, and the sun's intensity forced them to slow their pace. Jacob found a shaded spot near a large rock formation and gestured for them to rest. He offered them water first, then took a sip himself. "You must conserve your strength," he said gently, pointing to the water skin and then to the sun above. It was simple advice, but survival often depended on small decisions like this. During the rest, Jacob began to communicate with the siblings more directly. He had learned a few words of their language from previous encounters and tried to use them carefully. Tay and Maya responded cautiously, but gradually they began to understand that Jacob was not a threat. Their posture relaxed slightly, and the tension in their faces eased. Jacob realized that building trust was not something that could be rushed. It had to grow slowly, like a plant in the harsh desert soil. The journey was not easy. The terrain was rugged and the desert offered no shortcuts. They had to climb steep inclines, cross dry washes filled with sharp rocks, and navigate through areas where water was scarce. Jacob took the lead, marking the path and pointing out hazards, while the siblings followed closely, learning from his movements. He explained silently, through gestures and careful words, how to find safe places to rest and how to conserve energy. Every lesson was a small step toward survival and, more importantly, toward trust. As they walked, Jacob observed the small signs of life in the desert. Tiny flowers grew in unexpected cracks in the rocks, and insects crawled along the sand in intricate patterns. The beauty of the desert, despite its harshness, reminded Jacob of why he valued life so deeply. He shared these observations with the siblings through gestures, pointing to the flowers and humming softly to mimic the movements of the insects. Though they did not fully understand, the effort was appreciated. Jacob realized that survival was not only about physical endurance, but also about understanding and respecting the environment. By the afternoon, the sun was high, and the heat became almost unbearable. Jacob noticed Maya faltering, her steps growing slower, and he immediately offered her water. Tay looked worried, and Jacob reassured him with a nod. They had come far, but the desert was relentless, and caution was necessary. Jacob decided to stop at the next shaded area and set up a temporary rest. He cleared a small space, helped the siblings settle, and offered them more water and some dried meat. Eating and resting was essential. Without it, the next leg of the journey could become dangerous. During this break, Jacob noticed the small wounds on Tay's hands, likely caused by climbing over rocks earlier. He cleaned them carefully, using water and a bit of cloth to prevent infection. Tay flinched at first but allowed Jacob to tend to him. Maya watched silently, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Jacob explained gently through gestures that these wounds needed attention to avoid worse problems later. The act of care created a deeper bond between them. Jacob realized that compassion could be as important as skill in this harsh land. As the day progressed, the trio continued their journey, moving slowly and deliberately. Jacob taught Tay how to identify safe drinking water, even if it was just a small trickle in a rocky crevice. He showed Maya how to recognize signs of desert wildlife, which could be helpful both for avoiding danger and for finding food. The siblings listened carefully, asking questions through gestures and simple words. Jacob admired their intelligence and resilience. Despite their youth and recent trauma, they were learning quickly and adapting to the environment with remarkable strength. By evening, the desert air had cooled slightly, and the trio reached a small dry creek bed. Jacob decided this would be their campsite for the night. He built a small fire, careful to keep it low to avoid drawing attention. He taught the siblings how to safely gather firewood and maintain the flame. As the fire flickered, casting shadows across their tired faces, Jacob felt a quiet satisfaction. They had made it through the day, and he could see the small but growing trust in their eyes. Around the fire, Jacob shared more of himself with the siblings, as best as he could through gestures and simple words. He spoke of the desert, of the dangers they had faced, and of the importance of staying together. Tay and Maya listened attentively, their expressions shifting from fear to cautious hope. Jacob realized that stories and guidance were powerful tools, helping to build confidence and a sense of security. That night, as the three settled under a sky full of stars, Jacob felt a deep sense of responsibility. The desert was still dangerous, and there were many more challenges ahead. But he had made a promise to protect these two young people and to treat them with respect and care. The weight of that promise was heavy, but it also gave him purpose. He knew that courage alone was not enough. Compassion, patience, and understanding would be just as crucial on the journey ahead. Sleep came slowly, and Jacob kept one eye open, alert to the sounds of the desert. He noticed the small movements of nocturnal animals, the distant howls of coyotes, and the whisper of wind across the sand. The siblings slept close together, finding comfort in each other's presence. Jacob's thoughts wandered to their lives before capture, their family, their home, and the hardships they had endured. He wished he could undo the pain they had suffered, but all he could do now was offer safety and guidance. The night passed quietly, and with the first light of dawn, Jacob prepared to continue their journey. He packed their supplies carefully, making sure they had enough water and food for the next day. Tay and Maya followed his instructions, moving with more confidence than the day before. Jacob could see the subtle changes in them, the way they carried themselves, the way they looked at him not with fear but with cautious trust. As they moved through the desert, Jacob reflected on the lessons he had learned over the years. Survival was not simply about strength or skill. It was about understanding, patience, and the ability to make choices guided by morality rather than fear or tradition. The desert demanded respect, and human life demanded even more. He had chosen to protect these two siblings, not because it was easy or convenient, but because it was right. That decision, he knew, would shape not only their lives but his own in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. By midday, they reached a rocky outcrop that offered a better vantage point. Jacob stopped to assess the surrounding terrain, looking for potential threats and planning their route forward. Tay and Maya observed him closely, learning the signs of danger, the subtle changes in the landscape that could signal water or shelter. Jacob felt a quiet pride in their ability to adapt. They were no longer just captives. They were becoming survivors, capable of facing the challenges of the desert alongside him. The remainder of the day was filled with careful travel, brief rests, and moments of shared understanding. Jacob taught the siblings how to move quietly over sand, how to avoid sharp rocks, and how to ration their water effectively. Each lesson strengthened their confidence and deepened their bond. The desert was harsh and relentless, but together they found ways to endure. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the sand, Jacob found another sheltered spot for the night. They built a small fire, shared a modest meal, and settled in for rest. Jacob watched the siblings as they slept, their faces calm but marked with traces of worry and fatigue. He understood the depth of their fear and the courage it took to trust him. In the quiet of the night, Jacob reflected on the day's journey. He had faced the harsh reality of the desert, the complexity of human morality, and the challenge of protecting lives in a dangerous world. But he also recognized the small victories, the trust earned, the lessons learned, and the resilience of the human spirit. For Jacob, these moments were as important as survival itself. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast sea of sand and rock under the blazing sun. Jacob Carter led Tay and Maya along a narrow path that wound through rocky hills and small canyons. Each step was careful and deliberate. The desert was beautiful, in a harsh, unforgiving way, but it was also full of hidden dangers. A wrong step could twist an ankle, and a careless moment could lead to disaster. Jacob kept his eyes sharp, scanning the terrain for every possible threat. Tay walked close to Jacob, mimicking his movements and learning how to move silently over loose sand and sharp rocks. Maya followed a few steps behind, carrying their small bundle of supplies. Though tired, their faces showed determination. Each had survived hardships before, and Jacob could see that spirit in their eyes. He felt proud but also aware that danger still lurked around every bend. The desert did not forgive mistakes easily. As they climbed a rocky ridge, Jacob paused to look back. The vast landscape spread behind them, waves of sand interspersed with jagged rocks and small patches of hardy vegetation. In the distance, the faint outline of a mountain range promised a place of safety and water, but getting there would not be easy. Jacob traced a careful path, choosing the most stable ground and avoiding loose stones that could cause them to slip. He gestured for Tay and Maya to follow slowly, keeping the pace steady. The morning passed with careful progress. Jacob pointed out signs of desert life, small burrows that could belong to desert foxes, tracks of animals that might indicate water nearby, and areas where plants grew despite the harsh conditions. He taught the siblings to observe, to notice subtle details that could mean the difference between safety and danger. Tay asked questions with his hands, pointing to different tracks, and Jacob explained patiently. Maya watched closely, her eyes bright with curiosity, soaking in every lesson. By midday, the sun climbed high and the heat became intense. Jacob noticed Maya struggling with the weight of the small bundle. He stepped forward and offered to carry part of it, showing her that help was not a weakness but a strategy. Tay helped as well, and together they moved forward as a team. The desert demanded cooperation, and Jacob wanted the siblings to understand that survival was not a solo effort. They needed each other and they needed him. As they reached a narrow canyon, Jacob noticed fresh tracks in the sand, human tracks, moving in the same direction. He crouched slightly, studying them. They were not Apache, he realized, but settlers or travelers, possibly armed. He gestured to the siblings to stay quiet and follow closely behind. The canyon could provide cover, but it also trapped them if they were discovered. Jacob's instincts were sharp, honed over years of experience. He knew that caution now could save lives. The group moved slowly through the canyon, shadows stretching long across the sand. Jacob whispered instructions, guiding Tay and Maya over rocks and around loose stones. The siblings followed carefully, their trust in him growing with every step. The tension was high. One wrong move could expose them. Jacob could feel the pressure, but he remained calm, knowing that fear could spread quickly and endanger all three of them. When they reached a point where the canyon widened, Jacob stopped and took a breath. He scanned the surrounding hills for any sign of the travelers. Seeing none, he nodded for the siblings to relax slightly. They crouched behind a large boulder and Jacob offered them a sip of water. It was a small relief, but in the desert, even small comforts mattered greatly. Tay looked at Jacob, his eyes reflecting trust and curiosity. Maya gave a faint smile, her first sign of ease since the journey began. As they continued, Jacob told them through gestures and simple words that they would face challenges, but he would guide them through safely. The desert could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be a place of learning and growth. The siblings listened intently, understanding that the lessons Jacob shared were not just about survival, they were about life itself. The afternoon brought another test. They came across a dry riverbed filled with loose stones and deep sand. Jacob paused, studying the ground. Moving across this section would be tricky. One misstep could twist an ankle or cause a fall. He demonstrated the best path, showing how to place each foot carefully using small rocks for balance. Tay and Maya followed, their steps cautious but determined. They stumbled occasionally, but Jacob was close, ready to steady them. The exercise was exhausting but necessary, teaching them the importance of patience and careful observation. As the day wore on, the desert wind picked up, stirring sand into small whirls that danced across the landscape. Jacob led the siblings to a rocky outcrop that offered partial shelter. They rested, shared water, and ate a small portion of dried meat. Jacob took a moment to look at the siblings closely. He noticed the faint scars on their hands and arms, evidence of previous hardships. Their faces, though young, carried the weight of experience and resilience. He admired their strength, but he also felt a deep responsibility to protect them. While resting, Jacob began to teach them how to read subtle signs of the desert. He showed Tay how to find shade, how to recognize plants that could provide minimal moisture, and how to listen for the faint sounds of water trickling in hidden crevices. Maya watched closely, memorizing every detail. Jacob explained that understanding the land was not just about survival, it was about respect. The desert gave life to those who learned its lessons, but it punished carelessness without mercy. By evening, the temperature began to drop, and Jacob guided the siblings to a small canyon where they could set up a modest camp. He helped them gather firewood, teaching them how to build a fire safely without drawing attention from potential threats. The siblings followed his instructions carefully, learning quickly. The fire became a small beacon of warmth and comfort, a temporary refuge from the challenges of the desert. As night fell, the desert became quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Jacob sat with the siblings, sharing stories through gestures and simple words. He spoke of his travels, of the dangers he had faced, and of the importance of courage and patience. Tay and Maya listened closely, understanding not every word but grasping the meaning behind the tone and the care in his voice. They began to see Jacob not just as a protector but as a guide and a mentor. During the night, Jacob remained alert. He kept one eye open, listening for unusual sounds or signs of danger. The desert was alive even in darkness, and vigilance was essential. He watched the siblings sleep, noting the rise and fall of their chests and the way they huddled together for warmth. Despite their fear, they had begun to trust him, and that trust was a fragile but precious gift. The following morning, they continued their journey, moving through rolling dunes and rocky ridges. Jacob taught the siblings how to identify safe paths, how to move quietly to avoid drawing attention, and how to ration their remaining water. Each lesson reinforced their confidence and strengthened their ability to survive in the harsh environment. The siblings began to rely on each other more, learning to communicate without words and support one another during difficult moments. By midday, they reached a small spring hidden in a rocky basin. Jacob allowed the siblings to drink freely, knowing that water was a rare and vital resource. Tay and Maya filled their small water skins, and Jacob reminded them to conserve carefully for the journey ahead. The brief respite was a relief, but Jacob also reminded them that the desert could change quickly, and danger could return at any moment. As they continued, Jacob shared simple survival strategies that had kept him alive for years. He taught the siblings how to identify edible plants, how to recognize signs of approaching weather, and how to move cautiously in areas where predators might be present. Each skill was essential, and the siblings absorbed the lessons eagerly. Jacob admired their resilience and adaptability, understanding that these qualities would be crucial for the remainder of their journey. By late afternoon, they approached a rocky ridge that offered a vantage point over the surrounding desert. Jacob stopped to assess the landscape. He could see signs of an approaching storm, a shift in wind patterns and distant clouds forming over the mountains. He gestured for the siblings to stay close and led them down a safer path, avoiding exposed areas. The desert could be unforgiving, and preparation was essential. The siblings began to show signs of fatigue, their movements slower but still determined. Jacob encouraged them gently, offering water and reminding them of the importance of steady progress. He understood that their endurance would be tested not just physically, but mentally. Keeping their spirits up was as important as ensuring their bodies could survive. As evening fell, Jacob guided them to a small natural cave that could provide shelter. He helped the siblings settle in, ensuring they had a small fire for warmth and protection. The cave offered a sense of security, and the siblings allowed themselves a moment of relief. Jacob used the quiet to reflect on the day's journey. They had faced challenges, learned new skills, and deepened their bond. Despite the harshness of the desert, progress had been made, and the siblings' trust in him had grown stronger. Night came, and the desert stars twinkled above in a clear, endless sky. Jacob kept watch, alert for any signs of danger. The siblings slept nearby, huddled together for warmth and comfort. Jacob felt a deep sense of purpose. The desert was still dangerous, but he had chosen to protect these two young lives, and he would continue to do so, no matter the hardships ahead. The bond they were forming would be their greatest strength in facing the challenges yet to come. The desert morning was crisp, with the first light of dawn stretching across the rugged landscape. Jacob Carter stirred from his sleep, careful not to wake Tay and Maya, who had huddled together for warmth throughout the night. Their journey had been long and exhausting, but this morning brought a sense of quiet anticipation. The distant mountains, bathed in golden sunlight, promised the possibility of safety, water, and a new beginning. Jacob allowed himself a small sigh of relief, knowing that the hardest part of their journey was almost over. He moved quietly, gathering firewood and checking their supplies. The siblings stirred slowly, blinking in the early light, still tired but ready to face another day. Jacob handed them water and gestured toward the trail ahead, encouraging them to conserve their strength. Each step had to be deliberate. The desert was merciless, and mistakes could be costly. He could see the determination in their eyes, a reflection of the resilience that had carried them through every challenge so far. As they began walking, Jacob led the way carefully, pointing out safe paths across rocky terrain and loose sand. Tay followed closely, absorbing every movement and gesture, while Maya carried their small bundle, her posture more confident than the day before. Jacob noticed subtle changes in them, the way they moved with more purpose, how their eyes scanned the horizon for signs of danger, and the small smiles that sometimes flickered across their faces. Progress was slow but steady, and each moment of learning brought a renewed sense of hope. By mid-morning, they reached a narrow valley where a small stream ran through the rocks. Jacob signaled for them to stop. Water in the desert was precious, and this stream offered a brief respite. The siblings drank eagerly, filling their water skins for the journey ahead. Jacob watched them carefully, making sure they did not overexert themselves. Even in moments of relief, caution was essential. He showed them how to use the water wisely, emphasizing that survival was as much about careful planning as it was about endurance. After a short rest, they continued their trek toward the mountains. The terrain became more challenging, with steep inclines and jagged rocks. Jacob led the siblings up a narrow path, pointing out loose stones and helping them navigate tricky sections. Tay and Maya followed his instructions carefully, relying on the lessons they had learned over the past days. Each step was a small victory, a proof of their growing confidence and trust in Jacob's guidance. As the sun climbed higher, the heat intensified. Jacob noticed the signs of fatigue in the siblings, the slight slowing of their steps, the deepening shadows under their eyes. He encouraged them gently, offering water and reminding them to pace themselves. Survival in the desert was not just about physical strength. It was about mental endurance, about maintaining hope and focus even when the body was tired. Tay and Maya listened closely, understanding that Jacob's words were as important as his actions. Around midday, they encountered a rocky plateau that offered a broad view of the surrounding landscape. From this vantage point, Jacob could see the path ahead, winding through a series of hills and canyons toward the distant settlement where he could ensure their safety. He pointed it out to the siblings, using gestures to explain that the end of their journey was near. A flicker of relief appeared in their eyes, though exhaustion remained. They had traveled far and faced many dangers, but the promise of safety gave them renewed energy. As they descended from the plateau, Jacob noticed the first signs of wildlife: small birds hopping between rocks, lizards darting across the sand, and the faint rustle of distant animals. He used these observations to teach the siblings once more, showing them how to read the desert, how to recognize signs of water and shelter, and how to move quietly to avoid potential threats. Each lesson reinforced their confidence, reminding them that the desert, though harsh, could also provide guidance and sustenance to those who paid attention. By mid-afternoon, the trio reached a small grove of trees near a hidden spring. Jacob signaled for them to rest, allowing the siblings to drink and refresh themselves. The shade was a welcome relief from the relentless sun, and the gentle sound of water brought a rare sense of calm. Jacob reminded them to remain alert, knowing that even in moments of comfort, vigilance was necessary. Tay and Maya nodded, understanding that survival required both caution and courage. While they rested, Jacob reflected on their journey. They had faced countless challenges: heat, exhaustion, rugged terrain, and uncertainty. But through it all, the siblings had shown remarkable resilience. He realized that their trust in him had grown steadily, and that bond was now unbreakable. Jacob felt a deep sense of responsibility, not only for their physical safety, but also for their emotional well-being. They had endured so much, and he would continue to guide and protect them until they reached true safety. As evening approached, Jacob led them through a narrow canyon that opened onto a gently rolling valley. In the distance, he could see the outline of the settlement where he could secure their freedom. His heart lifted slightly, knowing that their long journey was nearing its end. He encouraged the siblings to keep moving, offering water and small words of reassurance. Their steps grew steadier, their determination unwavering. The desert had tested them, but it had also strengthened them in ways they could now recognize. The final stretch was not without its challenges. The valley was dotted with patches of rough terrain and sudden drops, requiring careful navigation. Jacob moved ahead, signaling the safest paths and guiding the siblings around obstacles. Tay and Maya followed, relying on the skills they had learned over the past days. Each step was measured, deliberate, and confident. Jacob could see their growth clearly. They were no longer just survivors. They were becoming capable of facing the desert on their own. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley, they finally reached the outskirts of the settlement. Jacob led the siblings through quiet streets, careful to avoid unnecessary attention. The people here were mostly settlers and travelers who respected the desert's rules and understood its dangers. Jacob knew that once they reached the safety of this place, he could ensure the siblings protection and eventual freedom. He approached a trusted acquaintance, a kind man who ran a small inn and had helped travelers in the past. Jacob explained the situation carefully, using simple words and gestures to convey the siblings' need for safety. The man nodded, offering shelter and assistance without hesitation. Jacob felt a deep sense of relief. The long, arduous journey was finally nearing its conclusion, and the siblings would soon find a place where they could rest, heal, and begin anew. Tay and Maya looked around in wonder. The settlement was unlike anything they had seen in the desert: structures built from stone and wood, people moving about with purpose, and the distant laughter of children playing. It was a place of safety and community, a stark contrast to the harsh, lonely wilderness they had traversed. Jacob smiled gently, knowing that this was the first step toward a new life for them. Over the next few days, Jacob helped the siblings adjust to life in the settlement. He guided them to basic necessities: food, water, and safe shelter, and introduced them to people who could teach them new skills and offer protection. The siblings adapted quickly, their confidence growing as they learned to navigate this new environment. Jacob watched with quiet pride as they began to laugh, speak, and interact with others, slowly shedding the fear and exhaustion that had marked their early days of captivity and escape. During their time in the settlement, Jacob reflected on the journey they had shared. He thought about the moments of danger, the lessons learned, and the trust that had grown between them. He realized that courage alone had not been enough. Compassion, patience, and understanding had been just as crucial. The siblings had endured more than most could imagine, and their resilience had inspired him as much as he had guided them. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Jacob sat with Tay and Maya near a small fire. He spoke gently, using simple words and gestures to convey a message of hope. The siblings listened closely, their eyes reflecting gratitude and trust. Jacob knew that their journey had not only been about reaching safety, but also about discovering their own strength and the power of human connection. The settlement gradually became a place of stability for the siblings. They began to rebuild their lives, learning new skills and forming bonds with the people around them. Jacob remained nearby, offering guidance and support when needed, but also allowing them space to grow and gain independence. He understood that true protection sometimes meant stepping back and letting those you care for find their own path. In the weeks that followed, Jacob often watched the siblings from a distance, marveling at how far they had come. Tay had grown more confident, learning the ways of the settlement and helping others when he could. Maya had flourished as well, her quiet strength becoming a source of inspiration for those around her. Jacob felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his decision to protect both siblings had made a lasting difference in their lives. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the settlement in soft gold, Jacob reflected on the journey. The desert had tested them all, its heat, its terrain, and its dangers, but it had also taught invaluable lessons. He realized that the bonds formed in hardship were unbreakable, that trust and courage could overcome fear, and that the choice to act with integrity could change lives in profound ways. As the siblings played quietly nearby, their laughter a gentle contrast to the harsh memories of the past, Jacob felt a sense of closure. Their journey through the desert had ended, but the impact of their experiences would remain with them forever. He had guided them to safety, but more importantly, he had helped them reclaim their sense of hope, strength, and dignity. In the quiet of that morning, Jacob allowed himself a rare smile. The desert was behind them now, and the future stretched ahead, full of possibility. Tay and Maya would continue to grow, to learn, and to thrive, carrying with them the lessons of survival, courage, and compassion. Jacob knew that their story was far from over, but he also knew that they were ready to face whatever came next. For Jacob, the journey had been transformative as well. Protecting the siblings had strengthened his own understanding of humanity, justice, and the importance of standing by one's convictions. The choices he had made, though difficult, had led to a profound sense of purpose and fulfillment. As he watched the sun rise over the settlement, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the lives of two young people had been changed forever, and in that, he found a lasting sense of meaning. The siblings walked through the settlement hand in hand, their eyes bright with hope and curiosity. The desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had taught them resilience, trust, and the value of human connection. Jacob walked alongside them, a silent guardian, knowing that his role had shifted from protector to guide, and that the bonds they had formed would endure far beyond the trials of the desert. And so, under the vast, endless sky, Tay and Maya stepped into a new life, free and strong, carrying with them the lessons of courage, compassion, and the unwavering support of a man who had chosen to see them as more than mere captives, but as human beings worthy of dignity and hope.